Hey, what's going on everyone? Welcome back to Bruh 3 Houses Takes Bingo, and today we're going to take a look at the fourth row of the bingo right here. So far we haven't had any green, it's mostly just been red with a couple of smidges of yellow and orange, which means general disagreement, but in here we might find something that's actually agreeable, or maybe not. The reason I'm only doing one row is because I think 2 rows will go a bit long, so that I just make 2 videos and talk a little more elaborately on these takes. But if it ends up a bit short of a video, you'll know that's why. So first up, did not upgrade battalions on units after chapter 3. And like just as a reminder, this is just for fun to see if there's something worth talking about here, or if there's something worth agreeing or disagreeing with, or like even how relatable this takes is, even if we don't agree with it. This is actually one that I can sometimes relate to when I play 3 houses. I would just forget to look at the battalion guild and forget to buy the new battalions that are available. There's like a difference between forgetting to do it and deliberately choosing not to do it because you think it's not worth it, or because you didn't, for example, budget enough gold to be able to afford all these battalions, which is something that, you know, you should make a distinguishment between. So one of the battalions in that goes available after chapter 3 or after chapter 2, I guess technically, is Stride, which is something you will always want to get. I don't think I have to convince anyone how good Stride is. I know people who think it's bad, but those people are not even worth trying to convince. They're so stuck in their own ways. Stride, obviously, one of the most broken battalions of 3 houses. We knew it was there before release, and I'm very glad it was actually in the game, because it's the only way to get more than 4 move in the early game, it feels like. But yeah, Stride is good. Another one that I really like is the battalion that gives Blaze. I think it's differently named depending on which house you're in, whereas the Stride battalion is always the Zero's Holy Monks. The one that gives you Blaze is like depends on like which lord you have, basically, or like which house you're in. So but it's always something with like a bunch of horses, and it uses Blaze, and it's the Blaze gambit itself is nice. I've always been a bit anxious about Blaze when I first played the game because it only has 1 use, whereas every other like rattling battalion you get, every other rattling gambit you have 2 uses, and it, you know, I like to have more uses on my gambits just so that if I use one, I'll have another one left, and if I use Blaze once, I'll never have that option again. So it's kind of like a hoarding problem that I sometimes unfortunately have. But Blaze is really good. You can freeze a huge amount of enemies with it, and of course it's also in a battalion that gives better bonuses, so you should almost always get it. I guess it's possible that you don't have anyone who can use it right away. I've definitely had playthroughs on Maddening where you haven't reached the authority rank to use it. It's C rank, and I think the lords start with like D, so does Wynath, so you might not be able to use it right away, but you should aim to get it as soon as you can. Maybe train some authority early on if you have the option to, because it's really good, and the bonuses are really nice. Is there a reason not to choose not to do so? Like I said, you could forget to budget the gold for it. Gold early on in 3 houses is not actually that plentiful. You get a lot later on, especially once you unlock the training grounds or the arena, whatever it's called. But early on, it can be a bit of a stretch to get the battalions, but I generally find that it's worth foregoing other things over getting the battalions early on, because the stat bonuses are so big, and you can start training the battalions and gain authority rank with them if you don't have a battalion yet. I think before chapter 3 you only have 3 battalions, the Jeritza Mercenaries, the Zero's Holy, the Zero's, what's they're called? The Zero's Mercenaries, and then there's one other, but it doesn't matter, they're not that great besides the Jeritza Mercenaries. So you want to get more battalions, and you want to get units training on authority and like leveling up a battalion, or maybe chipping them down for battalion or Wrath battalion advantage later if you're into that. So not getting those battalions as soon as possible is a bit of a mistake. The only exception here could be like units like Felix and Catherine that have personal skills that don't want battalions. In that case, they could get by without one. We'll get into that next time, but even those, I think, eventually want a battalion of some sorts. So generally, you should set aside enough gold to buy these battalions. They're like 1,000, maybe like 1,200 a piece, so it's quite a bit of your budget. But if you have to choose between like buying 3 steel weapons or buying 2 steel weapons and then or buying a battalion, I think the battalion is almost always the correct choice here. I don't think you should ever forego them. I'm trying to remember what the other battalions here are in chapter 3. The next big unlock is like chapter 7, chapter 8. I think by that point people are generally well aware. But battalions, I think, are just one of those things that new players will often kind of forego, especially if they're new to Fire Emblem in general, and they're not just quite used to the flow of Fire Emblem. It can be easy to forget about battalions. I know I didn't do a whole lot with them in my first playthrough because I was just like completely blind and completely new to the whole thing. But if you're aware that they exist and you have been told to get them, I don't see why you would argue against upgrading your battalions, because they're free stat bonuses and there's no real drawback to using them other than an initial investment that I think is 100% worth it. So yeah, big disagree. Let me see if I still have my paintbrush. There we go. See, I know how to Photoshop, guys. There we go. Nice and red. So like obviously I don't disagree with anyone that doesn't Like, you can play however you want. I just disagree that this is a good idea. Let me just make that clear. If you don't want to upgrade your battalions because you don't want to, or you're doing a challenge run, you know, you do you. Next up, Woe Dao Plus is one of the best weapons in the game. I might have mentioned this before, but this is not my specialty when it comes to Three Houses, the whole swords versus Axis debate. That's why I had a lot of talk with Rengar about this one, the Axis are bad overall one. But it's just kind of like an extension of that one, where it's about a specific weapon. I looked at it a bit, and I don't think the Woe Dao is, like, it's hard to really disagree with this, because one of the best is such a wide range of weapons that could be. For what I can see, the Woe Dao is one of the better swords in the game, and by extension, you could say it's one of the better weapons in the game. One of the best, I mean, I wouldn't say it's top 5, maybe not even top 10, but it's probably up there for sword users if they're specializing in that, because the crit is so high. I feel like one of the best ways to use sword users in Three Houses is to stack critical, and Woe Dao is the best way to do that. I will say the normal Woe Dao, like Unforged, is absolutely holy god awful with only 15 uses. But if you just use it a bit and then you like repair forge it, like you do that in one go, basically you get it down to 1 use or something and then you forge it, then you have a pretty good weapon on your hands. At first I was like, wow, the Woe Dao only has 15 uses, that's garbo. Just to demonstrate how bad it is, along with how bad Astra is, because Astra, we need to mention that at some point as well. Astra costs like 9 uses to use, or 8, let me see, I put it up here somewhere. Yeah, it costs 9 uses to use Astra. It's like you went through the trouble of mastering the Sword Master class, and then you have to like this awful combat art that has like 30% might with 5 uses. It's basically like a 1.5 stat boost to your might for 9 uses, which I just find hilarious. With also reduced hit, by the way, which is super cool. Every individual hit can miss, I believe. Super awesome. Doesn't give any might either. On top of that, it's just, yeah, it's so terrible. And then use 9 durability, and that cuts off over half of the normal Woe Dao. Like, it goes down from 15 to 9 in one shot, which means you can only use Astra once with each of your Woe Daos, which I just find hilarious. That said, if you upgrade it to a plus, you actually gain 10 uses on a Woe Dao plus, on top of it going to full use. So you actually have 25 uses, which means you can use Astra twice now. Yay. Obviously, you wouldn't use Astra if you know what you're doing, or unless you're like memeing around. I don't think Astra is worth using ever. It's just funny to do it because it has a funny animation. But generally, probably just attack people, or maybe use some kind of other crit combat art if you have it available. I can't think of any off the top of my head because I never really use sword focused units. But if you have one, you could probably stack it that way. But you're probably better off double attacking anyway. You could probably stack enough crit to the point where you can have like enough crit rate to reliably get crits on enemies. The one thing I worry about when using the Woe Dao Plus is that, sure, it's one of the stronger swords and one of the better swords overall, but it still doesn't have enough might to KO just about everything. It depends on what you face, of course. Obviously, you're not going to kill an armor unit with it unless you have really high strength, because it only has 9 might. You probably can have Sword Fair in a class with enough stacking. Even though the Sword Fair classes, like I went over before, the Sword Fair classes are not as good as, for example, the Lance Fair or the Axe Fair classes. So that's another issue with stacking. Like, you can stack a lot of damage, but if you're not doing enough damage to kill even with 2 crits, that can be a problem. But again, this depends on the difficulty, depends on the enemy you're fighting, and it depends on the unit you're using. So I can't really make a blanket statement like, oh no, the Woe Dao Plus is never good. I'm sure there are situations where it is good. When I think of the best weapons in Three Houses, I don't really think of the Woe Dao Plus. I think of, for example, the Amir because of Raging Storm and how good it is. I think of the Brave Axe Plus. I think of the Killer Axe Plus is another thing I need to mention. There's an equivalent to the Woe Dao, in my opinion, in the Axis class that's just pretty much better. It's C rank over B rank, not a big issue, I guess, since weapon ranks in Three Houses go up kind of fast. But it has 3 more might, 20 less hits, but the prowess skills of Axis also give more hit than the sword ones, so the hit gap is smaller than what the game suggests. It has more might, sure, but generally the Axe users, by the time you're stacking crit enough, you'll probably have enough strength to negate a bunch of that. And then it has only 5 less crit, for example. So I feel like the Killer Axe Plus is overall better than the Woe Dao, because the classes that use these axes well are better than the ones that use swords well. So the overall picture is that the Killer Axe Plus still works out better overall than the Woe Dao Plus. But this is about the overall rating of them, and some units and some builds, they'll probably want the Woe Dao Plus over the Killer Axe Plus. So that doesn't mean it's infinitely inferior. But I think if you counted up all the uses of one against all the uses of the other, I think you would find that the Woe Dao Plus does not really stack up well against the Killer Axe Plus. And the Killer Axe Plus, I don't even think is one of the best weapons in the game. Like I said, when I think best weapons in the game, I think like the relic weapons, especially Amir, stuff like that, that really just destroys enemies and like kind of tears open the game. at the seams. So I don't think Woe Dao is one of the best in the game. But I'm willing to give this a bit of a pass because I think there are some situations where it is the best option for a certain unit or a certain situation. And I don't know how broadly the statement of one of the best is supposed to be. So I'm going to give it the benefit of the doubt that it's actually meant to be like, it's one of the weapons you would use if you're trying to look for the best weapons, I guess. Like some of the builds have this as their best weapon. But if I had to make like a top 5 or top 10 and I wasn't GameRant.com, I would probably not put the Woe Dao Plus in there. Okay, next up is Great Lord Dimitri. This is an interesting one. I think everyone who played Three Houses somewhat blindly, not people who got into it after the hype kind of died down and like already knew the meta a bit and just kind of changed a bit like Rengo did. But I think everyone else who played Blue Lions at some point used this class. Like, first of all, you're forced to use it for one chapter at the very least, where you don't have many other better options hunting by daybreak. And pretty much everyone's first playthroughs, almost everyone's first playthroughs, are on hard or normal. And in those cases, I think Great Lord Dimitri works out pretty good. Mostly because Dimitri himself is just so powerful. His stats are insane, and on hard or normal, he reaches the benchmarks with double things, and his strength is enormous. And I think the reason that Great Lord Dimitri is on here on the bingo chart is because there might be some people defending it as a choice as like an optimal maddening class, which I think it is not. But I don't think it's a terrible choice for him either, because I went through the options of like what else Dimitri can be if you didn't go for Great Lord. And it's like, okay, yeah, Wyvern Rider is obviously better because it's very easy to certify for before the time skip. So even if you never make it to Wyvern Lord, it's still good for Dimitri to just be able to fly around, have one of the best stats set spreads in the game, have Axe Fair, and just use all the broken things that Wyvern Rider has. But obviously Wyvern is almost a bit of a cop-out at this point for being better than something else. Like the take is not Great Lord Dimitri is better than Wyvern Dimitri. It's just, Great Lord Dimitri is good, optimal. I don't even know what the take is exactly. It's just on here. The thing about, actually, is Great Lord I think it might actually be a different class. Hold up. It doesn't really matter because I think both of Dimitri's post-time skip classes are a bit in the same boat where they're not going to be your best option overall because the Wyvern exists. But beyond that, I have trouble thinking of many better classes, if that makes any sense. But I think it just works out fine for normal and hard. I just wouldn't say it's optimal, but I think it's fine if you just want to use Dimitri and don't want to think about things too much by trying to get him a better class. The other great thing about Great Lord and whatever it's called, High Prince or whatever, Dimitri's personal classes, you don't really have the ability to change Dimitri's class and what he is after the time skip. And if you didn't get him to anything else like Wyvern or maybe Paladin or something, then it's a bit like, okay, what do you do? Because you can't tutor the guy, you can't have tea with the guy, you can't do anything with the guy. So you might as well have this class if it's the best one you have available. It doesn't hold a candle to, for example, what Claude get. Like, let's get that out of the way. The Wyvern class in this game is much better, and so is Claude's custom Wyvern class. But I don't think it's terrible. It doesn't have too different of a stat spread compared to, for example, Paladin, from what I can see. So I think this one is alright. And on normal and hard at the very least, Dimitri has the other things that kind of aren't really locked to him, but people will give it to him anyway because it feels like it belongs to him. Like that personal lance he has, I forgot what it's called, Ariapbar. The Atrocity Combat Art, what the hell these things are called. The Gambit, the Blue Lion dude's Gambits, the one that he gets post-time skip, you know what I mean, the wave attack. All that stuff. It's not really Dimitri's, but you can give it to him and you kind of, story-wise, it kind of belongs to him. All those things are good and they work on Dimitri to a point where, like, I can't really tell anyone that using all these tools on Dimitri is wrong because he's a pretty good user of them. But, for example, with the C-rank battalions that the Lords get after time skip, the Lords are actually not the best users of those because they're only C-rank. And the Lords, one of their specialties is being able to use A-rank or higher battalions. Well, A-rank is the highest battalion, but you get what I mean. Like, really high battalions. So one of the best ways to use their gambits, their personal battalions, is to give them to someone else that has like C authority, like, I don't know, maybe Hilda or Felix has reached that point by time skip, or someone like Leone who has like mediocre authority overall. And you can give them something better, like, I don't know, the St. Keel Wyvern Company or something. So in that sense, I would generally recommend not using them on them, but it's not a bad choice. If you still have battalions on everyone that work kind of fine for you, then I don't think it's terrible. So I can't really... If someone said this is like super optimal, everyone should do this, I would disagree. But since that hasn't really been seen, I'm just gonna say I'm gonna give it like a pass-ish. Like, I can't agree with it being the optimal choice, but whatever. I still don't actually know for sure if this is the one that Dimitri gets later or the one that he gets after time skip. But it doesn't really matter because I think in that sense they're both the same for me. They're not optimal, but they're fine. I wouldn't hate anyone. I'm not gonna call anyone wrong for using them. Next up, Bow Knight is universally better than Sniper. This is something I thought when I first played the game. I looked at Shamir specifically and also Leone, and I was like, well, they both have Lance rank, like both have base, and they're kind of got a boon in it, and you can train them in it, and etc. It's pretty easy. So it feels like the game is trying to edge them towards this Bow Knight class from the Sniper class. And Bow Knight the Sniper, I don't think one is universally better than the other, so in that sense I disagree with this take. But I do think there's situations where Bow Knight is better, so I guess it's kind of like the Woe Dao one a little bit more so in favor of Bow Knight, because if you're playing on Maddening, I think you gotta go Sniper with everyone who's considering one of these classes. In fact, if you're playing Maddening, you're probably aiming someone for Sniper. You're never gonna train him in Lance rank and consider going Bow Knight. I think almost always on Maddening, you wanna go Sniper because Hunter's Volley is just too good. The exception is people who have, for example, point blank volley, like, I don't know, Cyril or Leone. In their cases, you could argue that point blank volley makes it so that they don't need Sniper as much if they're going for a bow focused build. And instead you can use point blank volley to kind of make up for that and then use the advantage of Bow Knight. The advantage of Bow Knight kind of depend on what route you're on. There are some routes where having all horse is sometimes even better than not having one. So the effort it takes to get to Bow Knight is not really worth it. Again, it depends, but for example, Crimson Flower, which I guess is not really relevant for Cyril, but it is relevant for Leone. I don't think you really want to train for the horse that much, and the riding rank can be pretty steep. Someone like Leone might already be in a horse class. In fact, Cyril could probably be too, and in that case, it's a pretty natural upgrade. So I think, honestly, you should just kind of decide from the start whether you're going Bow Knight or Sniper, and decide which one is better for the kind of playthrough you're doing, whether it's Maddening or Crimson Flower or none of those things. And kind of make up your mind from that. I don't think there's any unit that really... It's not really like you... No one should really get into Sniper and then consider going into Bow Knight. You should probably be built as a Sniper and then hardcore farm bow rank so you can get like maybe bow fare from like S+ bows. Or you should be aiming for Bow Knight in the first place and use like more mounted classes like Cavalier Paladin on the way there so that you're better. It's easier to certify into Bow Knight mostly, and maybe you could get riding move plus one or whatever, but I don't think that's like very relevant for anyone. That I would make a Bow Knight personally. But I will say on my normal and hard playthroughs, it was pretty easy to certify these units for Bow Knight because they had the Lance rank, and on hard, it's easier to tutor people. It's easier to get people to higher ranks because you get more XP from goals, and you get more skill XP from goals. In those cases, you get the Bow Knight, and you reach the thresholds for doubling enemies a lot easier, so the lack of Hunter's Volley, I mean, I didn't even know Hunter's Volley was a thing when I first played Three Houses, but the lack of Hunter's Volley is a lot less daunting. And in addition, like, of course, Leone has Point Blank Volley, which I also didn't know what the fuck it did, so I didn't use it on my first playthrough. But now that I know, I would consider it. If you don't have Point Blank Volley and you're playing on Maddening, I don't think it's worth it to go to Bow Knight because Hunter's Volley is so good. Especially the fact that you have so much range and that Maddening enemies hit so hard on counterattack, and it's so helpful to be able to attack from further away. Even if it's just 2 range, like from 3 range you get like a big hit penalty, but some units like Ignatz can afford that. I still think you want the range of Hunter's Volley despite everything, all the ranged penalties that you could get in Three Houses. I think it's too good. Also, if you're going Bow Knight, I do think it's also worth considering other classes besides Bow Knight that I think are just better in general. You might just want to be a Wyvern that uses bows. In Claude's case, obviously, it's that personal class. That's just the Wyvern using bows. That's much better than Bow Knight. Even though I think Claude has like a... I think Claude is like a Horse Spoon too. But I don't think he should ever go Bow Knight, obviously. And then someone like Leone, yeah, I think I'd rather be on a Wyvern or in a Pegasus even than be a Bow Knight. Generally, just being on a horse is not that great. It's worth noting, though, usually the mounted classes have a bit of a bad reputation when it comes to speed, but I actually compared their modifiers, like the class modifiers, and funnily enough, Sniper actually has a 0 speed modifier, and then Bow Knight has a 3 speed modifier, and then it gets reduced by 2 if they are mounted. If they're dismounted, then they actually have 3 speed on Sniper. So I think usually it doesn't make a big difference depending on whether you double or not. I think you would double regardless on hard, and you wouldn't double on Maddening. Maybe if you're Leone, you do double. But Shamir, for example, I noticed was like very slow post time skip. She would get doubled by enemies more often than not. But again, it really depends on the context. But as far as this statement goes, which is Bow Knight is universally better than Sniper, I really disagree. I think it might come from people who played other games where this is generally true. They're not always called Bow Knight, but things like Nomad Trooper or Ranger, they are universally better than Sniper in almost every case, in like GBA Fire Emblem games or even Genealogy of the Holy War. You could argue it in Thracia maybe, but generally the mounted version that often always has like an extra weapon type attached to it too is generally just better. But in this game, there's no way the Bow Knight is universally better. Like that qualifier of universally, I think, makes this a hard disagree for me. But I don't think Bow Knight is a bad class overall. I just think in Manning, it's generally outclassed by Sniper. For other difficulties, I would definitely use Bow Knight on some units. Now last, we have has never used Seteth or Jeritza. I was about to agree with this one, or like partially. I was going to agree with Seteth, and I realized I technically have used Seteth, just not in the way that most people would. But I have technically used Seteth, and I used like Jeritza a lot. When Jeritza launched, when he got into the game through like a downloadable, through like DLC basically, free DLC, like an update, whatever it's called. When he got in, I used him right away, and it was a pretty fun stream, and that's where the I live meme was born, because that's what he says when Jeritza, you like heal him or use a gambit on him, like a supportive gambit. He says that shit, and it's funny as shit. So I've used Jeritza. He's ridiculous. He has amazing stats, amazing bases, and the funny thing is when the upgrade was first launched, Jeritza was like added to every post-time skip army of the Crimson Flower. So if you had a save file in like chapter 18, you would just suddenly get Jeritza out-leveled to like level 40 or something. It was pretty funny. But usually you'll get him now after the time skip, and you'll just get him at his base level basically. And he's ridiculous. There's no reason not to use him. I understand though people not using Jeritza and also Seteth, because these units join relatively late in a campaign that's really heavily focused on getting to know your students and, you know, your house lord and Bailat themselves. So imagine you have exactly enough units to fill our unit slots. Who is going to throw away all the attachment that they have to their current units and replace them with a unit like Jeritza or Seteth? There's not going to be many people doing that. That doesn't mean that they don't have their fans. Like, I know there's a lot of people who like Seteth and Jeritza, especially Seteth is like a fan favorite. But even so, I feel like most people would use these units as like filler if they have room. But if they gotta like ditch one of their students to do it, I don't think many people would do that. And I understand why from like an attachment sense. From an optimized sense, I think you're doing yourself a disservice by not using these units or even like just trying them out. Personally, I've been wanting to try out Seteth for a long time. I just can't be bothered to go through 3 houses for like the 15th time. Jeritza I have used elaborately though, as I said before. I used them on my Crimson Flower maddening playthrough that just happened to be going on when he was launched, and I really enjoyed it. He is ridiculous. And Seteth is just, he's just one of the best Wyvern Lords in the game, which is saying a lot. He's just built to be one. He has all the tools he needs. He's the 3rd Swift Strike user beyond Ferdinand and Sylvain, and that's really all he needs to be viable, but then he has like ridiculous stats on top of it. Seteth is very stupid. I also like that he has the option to go Adjutant with Flame. Flame boosts his damage even more with linked attacks, which work with Adjutants, so you can turn Flame into a flyer as well at base, like just turn him to Pegasus Knight, attach to Seteth's hip, and then just like go off and kill things together. You can also put Seteth in like a ground-based class, like a Paladin, and then have Flame just grind armor rank all game long, and then at some point you'll be able to qualify as an Armor Knight and be a Guard Adjutant for Seteth, which is also super funny. It still gives him that bonus to his attack as well, so I like that too. And I don't know, there's not much to say about Seteth. The way I used him on my first playthrough is very stupid. I didn't really incorporate him into my army, but when I got the like I was playing, not my first playthrough, but I was playing Blue Lions on New Game Plus, so I could kind of do whatever I want. And I got the Dance of the Goddess Battalion. I wanted to use it. Seteth had the authority rank to do so, but if you're flying, you can't use Dance. You can't use Dance of the Goddess. You can't use the Blue Line Dancer. So what I did is I reclassed him backwards to Cavalier, which is he has that at base. He can go Cavalier at base. So you just reclass him. I gave him the Blue Line Dancers and I used that. Unfortunately, it completely nerfs his combat to ship because I removed the advanced class bonuses from Wyvern. He like worse modifiers thanks to it, and then also the Dance of the Goddess Battalion gives you minus attack. So it's just awful. It made him horrible at combat. And in hindsight, it was like a pretty bad idea because I never really found a good spot to use Dance of the Goddess. You only get 1 per battle, so it was I was kind of holding on to it until like I get a good opportunity to use it. And even then, it was hard for him to keep up with my units because even though he was a Cavalier, a lot of my other units were Wyverns. So what the hell could they even do? They just kind of flew away from Seteth and never saw them again unless I moved them backwards. So not the greatest way to use Seteth, but I have seen him demonstrated in other ways that make me really like him as a unit, even though I've never touched him in a way that I, you know, that's going to sound very wrong, but I've never used him in a way that most people would use Seteth, which is just Wyvern Rider, Wyvern Lord, straight up, Swift Strike, spam, everything. But yeah, it's hard to say it's wrong to never have used these, but if you're saying they're bad and you never use them, then I think you're wrong. So I think I'm going to get this one a nice little orange. So far, if I'm going by bingo rules and I have to like bingo, if I got bingo every time I agree with something, or if I get bingo when I have like a whole row of agreements, I lose. But we could still get bingo for like full disagreements. Maybe we can get a full red down on this line here, or maybe we can like almost get a bingo down here. Other than that, it's not going to be a whole lot of bingo opportunities, but maybe we'll get like a full red here. That's also an opportunity to just get like 5 reds here. That's also an option, get double bingo. I'm looking forward to that. But yeah, those are my takes. Like I said, I don't think none of these are really as, I don't want to say offensively wrong, but as terribly wrong as some of the other ones, even though I called some of them red. For example, I think, what's the worst one? I think the worst one is this one. Ash is a good unit, and Warp is overrated, it's kind of bad, and then those are like the ones I disagree with the most, but generally these are more lukewarm for me, more like, okay, whatever. But I think they're still interesting discussion points, so let me know what you think. Let me know if you disagree with any of this or anything I said. I'm probably wrong on something, because, you know, I'm not infallible, not even close. But yeah, I'll see you guys next time for the bottom row, and thanks for watching. Peace.